Hi there, and welcome to Whisky Wealth Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Glen Palmer, and on the show this is for those that respect the spirit and think long term about wealth. It isn't about quick flips; it's about understanding whiskey as an asset, from the bonded warehouse to the balance sheet. Now, before we dive in, quick word: this show is brought to you by Whisky Wealth Mastery. It's an educational platform dedicated to helping people understand the whiskey investment properly. Now, each episode features industry insiders and serious whiskey people, cutting through the noise with real insight and real experience, and having honest conversations about why so many people fall in love with this liquid gold in the first place. Because if you're going to play the long game, you might as well play it like a warrior. So today I am joined by Cameron Jessiman, Director of CJ's Cask Company, a whiskey cask broker who's worked hands-on inside bonded warehouse for years before stepping out and building his own brokerage. Now, Cameron understands whiskey from the warehouse floor up, and that perspective is rare and invaluable. Cameron, thank you very much for coming on the show. I know you're a busy man, so it's much appreciated. Really looking forward to this one. Shall we dive in?
Thank you very much for having me.
You are more than welcome. So, one of the questions I ask everybody now, if time travel became a reality, Cameron, and you had a chance to go back in time to when you first started your career, what advice would the person that you are now tell your younger self?
It would probably be getting to whiskey warehousing as early as possible, really. And it started at 19, so a year after turning 18, a year I missed out on probably then when, could have been in warehousing with whiskey, but really just get into something that you love straight away, really.
Yeah. Follow your passion. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have a lot of experience working in the bonded warehouse. And let's see if I can get this right. You worked at Achtermuchti?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, the Achtermuchti bond.
Achtermuchti, right. That is a mouthful, I've got to say.
Yeah, it's not an easy word to say.
No. So speaking of bonded warehouses, most investors never ever see inside of a bonded warehouse. So what actually happens to a cask during those years when it's just laying there? Where do you think the most common issues commonly lie?
Really, the cask will, they'll come into the warehouse and then get put either in racking, dunnage, or palletizing. So it all depends on what sort of type of storage they're in, depends on how often they'll get moved, and then if anything happens. So if it's in pallets, the most common thing is probably it leaking and you're not seeing it for months. If you don't go into the stores or the couple of rows across, then you'll not realize that the cask has been leaking or how long for, and then it's difficult to pinpoint which one exactly is leaking. It could be from top, middle of the bung. It could be from at any point really of the cask, and it could take a wee while to find out which one it actually is.
Yeah. So what's the differences between dunnage and palletization for those that are
So dunnage is the traditional way. It's basically that same as wrapping, but in wood. So it's long ways instead of, whereas palletized is stood up straight. So really in pallets, the bung is in the middle, so it could leak. That's the most likely point it's going to leak from. So if it's stood up straight, it could be leaking, really it could leak to halfway if there's something wrong with the cask. Whereas in dunnage and rafting, it's lengthways. So the bung should always be stood at like the highest point up. So that way it's the least likely going to leak.
Yeah. And so I'm assuming that the palletization is more for space fulfillment.
Yeah.
Because obviously dunnage can't, well, you've got very limited space, haven't you? Within that warehouse. So how often, just another quick question, how often did you actually go and have a look at those pallets and make sure that everything was 100% working, there's no leakages, etc., etc.?
Every day, really. So it just depends. You could only get so far back in those bays as well. So we called them bays and stores. So yeah, it all depends on, you know, how far back, because some of them could be 10, 12 pallets deep. So then that's, and some were 5, 6 pallets high. So if
Yeah.
you're to do, that on every row, it's thousands of casks, which you can't do really every day. But with like movements out for casks, you'd go into those bays and get the casks out. So whilst you're doing that, you can basically see a couple of different bays side by side, and
Yeah.
if there's any leaks, you'll notice it on the floor. It's then just pinpointing the cask that it's coming from.
Yeah. And now that you're a broker,
Yeah.
gleaming from your time as an operator and a manager, what are the biggest misconceptions people actually have when it comes to cask ownership, in your opinion?
And probably the biggest thing is the wood. Maybe people don't realize how vital the wood is. It could be, I just bought a couple of casks and they're 12, 11 years old, and it looks like the liquid went in yesterday. The wood's done absolutely nothing for it. So it's, you need to be really active on the cask, getting samples. If you're buying a cask that's 10, 11 years old, make sure you get a sample either when you're buying it or once you've bought it. But you could still be happy with the price and everything of the cask, but it's making sure, the liquid's actually good inside it. So yeah, it's vital to check the cask, and if it's done nothing, buy a good sherry cask or a wine cask, something like you'd want to finish it in, that sell well into brokers or indie bottlers, that different type of cask finish, basically.
Yeah. So picking the right cask is just as vital as sort of it's the whole process, isn't it?
Yeah.
Picking the right cask could be the difference between something that hasn't aged well within a cask and something that has aged well in the cask. And like you say, if you're buying a older cask, always make sure that you have at least one sample to make sure that it is performing the way that it should.
Yeah, and also if you can get a regauge, if it's not been regauged and it's 10, 12 years old, it could have lost a huge amount. Going back to if it's, been stored in pallets or anything, it could have leaked in those 10 years. You just don't know because you're not the person that's bought it before or anything like that. So yeah, a regauge is very important as well.
So doing your due diligence is extremely important if you're going to be buying an aged cask. And when it comes to regauging, would you insist that the broker does a regauge before you buy the cask or after?
So it depends on cask, really. It depends on the age is the biggest thing. If it's 20 years old, always get the regauge beforehand. Quite often it will have been done. It just depends on how recently. But 10, 11-year-old cask, it quite often hasn't been done yet. So if you can get it done, ask to get it done, basically.
Brilliant.
And at the same time, get the sample. It's, the cask is already out. There's no point in then getting a regauge and then saying, oh, let's get a sample afterwards. Get them both at the same time. It's easier for us as a warehouse side, coming from that background again. It's just, if you can get them both done at the same time.
Get it done at the same time.
Yeah.
And then the bonus about that is you get to taste a nice little bit of whiskey.
Yeah, exactly. And then, if you go ahead with the cask, you've got a sample to base it on from the beginning. So like what I've done, I've bought a couple of casks, so I got the regauge the sample, went ahead with the cask and bought some nice casks to re-rack it into. So and then you can then see the development of the new cask as well, because depends on if it's a first fill or a refill cask that you're putting it, re-racking it into, it could still not perform how you expect. It all depends on the cask again.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have an amazing job sourcing casks for your clients. So tell me through, how important is relationships in this industry when sourcing quality casks? And how did the warehouse background shape those connections?
Yeah, it's a huge thing, really. Yeah. Making sure you go to the right suppliers, to the right brokers who I usually go through. It's just making sure you're using people you know, people you trust, and also, the ones that have the right cask as well. You could be spending hours trying to find the cask that the customer wants, but really it still has to come from someone you're comfortable buying from.
Mhm.
Is a huge thing.
Yeah. And then when you actually choose casks for your clients today, what are the absolute non-negotiables you actually look for? And now that's beyond obviously the age and the distillery name.
Yeah, so again, it's cask type. So some people will sell it as a refill cask, which a refill cask could be 5 times refill. People, this is what some people probably maybe don't always know, is that cask could have been used so many different times over the years.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's if it's a refill cask, try and figure out, ask, did they have any information on how many times it's been refilled, or if it's been re-racked into a first fill cask. Find out, when it is re-racked, how long ago, what sort of cask it's actually in, or if it's had full maturation as well. That will make
Mhm.
a huge difference on color, the taste, all these different things as well.
Yeah. And then finally, Cameron, you pretty much walked away from a very secure warehouse career to go out on your own. That is a massive step, and I commend you for doing that. So, what gave you the confidence, to take that leap of faith? And what advice would you actually give someone considering a similar sort of leap?
Support, if you can take the leap, take the leap. It all comes back to sort of, it's how you feel. If you're confident enough it'll work, you'll make it work. If you're sort of in two minds, it's 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 different. I've always wanted my own business and running. I just find it way better, to be honest. But yeah,
Yeah.
if you can, then you make it work, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're thinking about it, I'd recommend going for it. And I I'm young enough that if it doesn't work out, I can go and start again. That it doesn't really matter. Is the
Yeah.
way I looked at it as well.
Yeah. It's having that confidence to take that leap and
Yeah,
to try it.
yeah,
Because you never know. If you don't try, you'll never know. So,
exactly.
Cameron, loved having you on the show. Really enjoyed our conversation. You are an extremely rare breed that has been working in both the bonded warehouse and then as a broker. So, you don't get many of them. They're either brokers or they've worked in warehouses. You don't get that
Yeah.
sort of blend of both. So, thank you for coming on the show. Hey, once
No,
again,
thanks very much for having me.
you are more than welcome. Once again, thanks to my listeners and viewers of YouTube as well. Cameron, just before we sign off, if listeners or viewers want to get in contact with you, learn what you offer at CJ's Cask Company, what are the best ways for my listeners or viewers to do that?
Either on my website, which is CJ's Cask Company, or again on Instagram as well, CJ's Cask Company. Either of those, get in touch. Yeah, I'll do whatever I can to help out.
Excellent. Well, that wraps up today's episode. Want to thank you for joining, Cameron, and sharing your knowledge. As a reminder, this show is brought to you by Whisky Wealth Mastery, where whiskey lovers go to learn the investment side of the spirit properly and responsibly. You've been listening to Whisky Wealth Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Glen Palmer. I was joined by Cameron Jessiman. Thanks again
Thank
for
you.
listening and watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.